What happens when a woman discovers her billionaire husband is cheating? What if she's 6 months pregnant with their first child, the long-awaited heir to a colossal fortune? Most would confront him, cry or call a lawyer. But Isabella Sterling is not most women. When she found her husband Alexander dining with his mistress at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, she didn't scream. She didn't throw a drink. She smiled, walked to their table, and pulled up a chair. What followed wasn't just a confrontation. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare that would shatter a dynasty and leave a powerful man utterly humiliated in front of the world. This is the story of how a woman's quiet grace became her most devastating weapon. The life of Isabella and Alexander Sterling was a meticulously curated masterpiece. To the outside world, they were the pinnacle of New York society. Alexander Sterling, the 38-year-old CEO of Sterling Global, a multi-generational real estate and tech empire, was devastatingly handsome, sharp, and commanded any room he entered. His name was synonymous with power, his face a regular feature in Forbes and Time. Isabella, at 32, was his perfect counterpart. She wasn't just beautiful. She possessed a serene elegance and an intellect that often went underestimated. An art historian with a degree from the Sorbonne, she ran the Sterling Foundation, the charitable arm of the family empire, with quiet efficiency and genuine passion. Their marriage, 5 years in the making, was considered a merger of equals New World ambition, meeting Old World grace. Their home was a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue, a testament to minimalist luxury, with panoramic views of Central Park. Its walls were adorned with a collection of art that Isabella had personally curated, a mix of impressionist masters and daring contemporary artists. It was a home built for magazine spreads and hosting powerful people, a stage for their perfect life. And now the final piece of that perfect life was falling into place. Isabella was 6 months pregnant with a son, the future heir to the Sterling dynasty. Alexander's father, the formidable patriarch Charles Sterling, was ecstatic. The board of directors was placated. The legacy was secured. But inside the gilded cage, the gold was beginning to flake. The change in Alexander had been subtle at first, a slow erosion of intimacy. He started working later, his excuses plausible but increasingly frequent. Board meetings running over, a late-night call with the Tokyo office, putting out a fire with the new acquisition. He would come home smelling of a faint, unfamiliar perfume, something floral and exotic, starkly different from Isabella's subtle scent of sandalwood and vanilla. He'd blame it on a client or a colleague. His phone, once casually left on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket or placed face down. He would take calls in his study, with the door firmly closed, his voice a low, urgent murmur. When she entered, he would end the call abruptly. "Just Julian, coordinating the gala," he'd say, naming his ever-loyal chief of staff. But his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. Isabella was no fool. She had been raised in a world where marriages were often strategic alliances, and infidelity was a quiet, dirty secret. But she believed they were different. Theirs had started with a genuine spark, a meeting of minds at a gallery opening where they debated the merits of Rothko for an hour. He had pursued her relentlessly, charmed by her wit and her refusal to be impressed by his name alone. He had promised her a partnership, a life of shared passions, not just shared assets. The pregnancy should have been their moment of ultimate union. In the first few months, Alexander was attentive, almost reverently so. He would rest his hand on her still flat stomach, a look of awe on his face. "Our son Izzy," he'd whisper. "He's going to change the world." But as her belly grew, so did the distance between them. The loving gestures became mechanical. The compliments felt rehearsed. The chill started to set in. The first concrete clue came in the form of a credit card statement. Isabella handled their personal finances, a task Alexander found tedious. Tucked between charges for the Foundation's annual gala and a custom-built crib was a charge for $75,000 from a boutique jeweler she'd never heard of Seraphine's atelier. It wasn't her birthday. It wasn't their anniversary. When she casually asked him about it, he froze for a fraction of a second before composing himself. "Ah, that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a gift for my mother. Her birthday is next month. I wanted to get something special." It was a perfect lie. Plausible, thoughtful even. Except for one small detail, Isabella had already purchased a birthday gift for her mother-in-law, a rare first-edition book they had discussed with Alexander weeks ago. He had forgotten. The lie, so smooth and yet so clumsy, was like a shard of glass in her heart. She didn't confront him. Her mind, trained to analyze the subtleties of art and history, began to see the patterns. The late nights, the secret calls, the phantom perfume, the extravagant, unexplained gift. They were brushstrokes in a portrait of deceit. Crying or screaming would achieve nothing. It would only give him the chance to lie more, to gaslight her, to call her hormonal and emotional due to the pregnancy. No. If Alexander was playing a game, she would learn the rules and play it better. She would not be a hysterical pregnant wife. She would be a sterling. And sterlings did not lose. Her first move was to call her old college friend, a woman named Chloe, who now ran one of London's most discreet private investigation firms. "Chloe," Isabella said, her voice even and calm as she sat in her sunlit home office overlooking the city. "I need your help with a delicate matter. It requires the utmost discretion. For you, Izzy. Anything." Chloe's voice came back, warm but professional. "What's going on?" "I need to know about a jeweler called Seraphine's Atelier in the city, and I need to know who my husband is meeting." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Chloe knew Isabella well enough to understand the gravity of the request. "I'll put my best person on it, a specialist in marital portfolio analysis. You'll have your answers soon." While she waited, Isabella played her part to perfection. She was the glowing, expectant mother. She attended charity luncheons, discussed nursery color palettes with her mother-in-law, and smiled lovingly at her husband during public appearances. She even brought up the Sterling Foundation Gala, their biggest event of the year, which was just a few weeks away. "Alexander, darling," she said one evening as he loosened his tie. "I was thinking about the seating chart for the gala. Should we put Marcus Thorne at our table? I know his company is a major competitor, but it might be a good political move." Alexander barely looked up from his phone. "Thorne, no. Absolutely not. Keep him as far away from me as possible. He's a snake." The venom in his voice was startling. Isabella filed that piece of information away. Marcus Thorne. A rival. A week later, a coded email arrived from Chloe. It contained a secure link to a folder. Isabella locked her office door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She clicked the link. The folder was filled with photographs and a detailed report. The pictures were grainy, long-lens shots, but the subjects were unmistakable. Alexander laughing and animated in a way she hadn't seen in months. And with him, a woman. She was stunning in a fierce, overt way that contrasted with Isabella's quiet beauty. Long, dark hair, sharp features, a wardrobe that screamed expensive and daring. The report identified her as Serafina Dubois, the 30-year-old owner of a trendy avant-garde art gallery in Chelsea. And as Chloe had discovered with a bit of digging, the owner of a small exclusive jewelry design studio, Seraphine's Atelier. The photos chronicled their meetings, lunches at discreet but chic bistros, late-evening drinks at shadowy hotel bars, a weekend trip to a boutique hotel in the Hamptons, a trip Alexander had claimed was a corporate retreat. The most damning photo showed Alexander fastening a necklace around Serafina's neck. It was a breathtaking piece, a cascade of black diamonds and a single enormous ruby, the $75,000 necklace. But it was the report that turned Isabella's blood to ice. Serafina Dubois wasn't just a gallery owner. Before opening her gallery, she had a brief but notable career in corporate strategy, working for a firm that specialized in hostile takeovers. And according to Chloe's source, she had recently been in quiet contact with several executives from Thorne Industries, the company run by Marcus Thorne, Alexander's biggest rival. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a sordid affair. It was something far more dangerous. Serafina wasn't just a mistress. She was a corporate predator. She wasn't after Alexander's heart. She was after his Ebora. And he, blinded by lust and arrogance, was leading her right through the front gates. The pain was immense, a physical blow that left her breathless. It wasn't just the betrayal of their marriage vows, but the utter disregard for their family, their future, their unborn child. He was risking everything they had built for a woman who was actively plotting his downfall. Isabella stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. She placed a protective hand on her swollen belly. The tears she had refused to shed now came not in a storm of hysteria, but as silent hot tracks down her face. She was mourning the man she thought she married, the life she thought they had. But as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the grief began to crystallize into something harder, colder. Resolve. She would not let this woman destroy her family's legacy. She would not let Alexander's folly ruin her son's birthright. He had made his move. Serafina had made hers. Now it was her turn to play. Her plan began to form not in a burst of anger, but as a slow, calculated strategy. A public divorce would be messy, ugly, and might give Serafina the chaos she needed to help Marcus Thorne make his move. A private confrontation would be met with lies and denial. No, the humiliation had to be as public as their life yet, as intimate as his betrayal. It had to be a statement, a move so audacious that it would leave him powerless. The PI's report mentioned their favorite meeting spot, L'Etoile, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a public number. It was where the city's true power brokers went to make deals and conduct their affairs in what they believed was absolute privacy. Alexander and Serafina dined there every Tuesday. Next Tuesday was in 5 days. Isabella wiped her tears, her expression hardening into a mask of pure determination. She picked up her phone, but she didn't call a lawyer. She called the head stylist at Bergdorf Goodman. "Celeste," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I need a dress, something for a quiet dinner, something memorable." The stage was set. The players were in position. The quiet, graceful wife was about to direct the final act. The 5 days leading up to Tuesday were a masterclass in deception. Isabella moved through her life with a newfound purpose, her grief and anger hidden beneath a veneer of serene domesticity. She was no longer just a wife. She was a general preparing for battle. She met with Celeste at Bergdorf's in a private salon. She didn't want something flashy or revealing. She needed armor. She chose a dress of deep emerald green silk, a custom design by Carolina Herrera. It was deceptively simple, with long sleeves and a high neckline, but it was tailored to perfection, draping over her 6-month pregnant belly, in a way that was both elegant and profoundly maternal. The color was chosen deliberately, the color of envy, but also of rebirth and power. It would stand out against the restaurant's crimson and gold decor. Her next call was to Julian Vance Alexander's chief of staff. Julian was in his early 40s, perpetually dressed in impeccable suits, his loyalty to the Sterling family absolute. He had served Alexander's father before him and viewed the Sterling legacy with near religious reverence. He was smart, discreet, and Isabella suspected not entirely blind to his boss's recent indiscretions. "Julian," she said, catching him between meetings, "I need a small favor, and it needs to stay entirely between us." "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Anything." "I need to see the final draft of the prenuptial agreement Alexander and I signed." There was a slight hesitation. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she replied, her voice placid. "I'm working on our estate planning for the baby, and my lawyer needs to cross-reference a clause. It's just tedious paperwork." The lie was smooth, corporate, and believable. Julian, ever the efficient soldier, sent a secure digital copy to her private email within the hour. That evening, Isabella didn't read it. She already knew what it contained. Her own father, a shrewd old-money patriarch himself, had insisted on a particularly robust infidelity clause, one that Alexander, in his love-struck arrogance 5 years ago, had barely glanced at before signing. The clause was an ironclad fortress. In the event of proven adultery, especially while expecting a child who was the designated heir control of Isabella's shares in Sterling Global, a significant non-voting block gifted to her upon marriage would immediately become voting shares. Furthermore, she would gain 2 seats on the Sterling Foundation's board and unilateral control over a substantial trust fund established for their future children. It was a nuclear option her father had put in place, hoping she would never need it. Instead of reading the prenup, she spent the evening researching. She delved into every article, every financial report, every snippet of gossip she could find on Marcus Thorne and Serafina Dubois. She discovered that Thorne Industries had been attempting a stealth acquisition of a smaller tech company that Sterling Global was also in the final stages of acquiring. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was an active corporate war. The intel Serafina could be feeding him would be devastating. She could be leaking bid numbers, negotiation strategies, internal weaknesses. Alexander wasn't just having an affair. He was committing corporate treason. Her anger was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. The sheer scale of his stupidity was breathtaking. On Saturday, she attended a charity luncheon for the New York Public Library. Several of the city's most powerful wives were there, women who traded information like currency. Isabella listened more than she spoke, steering the conversation with subtle questions. "I saw the most fascinating gallery in Chelsea the other day." She mentioned to a group that included the wife of a major banker. Dubois Gallery. The owner, Serafina, seems to have burst onto the scene. So ambitious. One of the women, a notorious gossip named Beatrice, took the bait immediately. "Ambitious is one word for it," she sniffed. "Climber is another. She's been seen everywhere with everyone. Last year, it was some European duke. Now she seems to have her sights set on the corporate world. I heard she's very close with Marcus Thorne." "Really?" Isabella asked, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Oh, yes." Beatrice continued, delighted to be the center of attention. My husband says Thorne is using her as a social consultant. We all know what that means. The pieces were not just connecting, they were forming a mosaic of conspiracy. Serafina was Thorne's weapon, aimed directly at the heart of Sterling Global. On Monday, the day before the dinner, Isabella made her final preparations. She scheduled a hair and makeup appointment for the following afternoon. She laid out the emerald dress along with a pair of low-heeled Manolo Blahniks and the simple strand of pearls her own grandmother had given her. It was a classic, unimpeachable look. Her final and most critical move was to set up a meeting for Wednesday morning, the day after the dinner. She sent a single encrypted email from a private account. It was not addressed to her lawyer. It was addressed to Charles Sterling, her father-in-law. The subject line was simple: urgent family matter regarding the future of the company. She requested a meeting at his private office alone. Charles, a man who wasted no time on trivialities, confirmed within minutes. 9 a.m. With that, her chessboard was set. Every piece was in position. She had the evidence from the PI. She had confirmation of Serafina's link to Thorne. She had her legal standing via the prenup. And she had an audience with the one man who could bring Alexander to his knees without destroying the company his father. The dinner at L'Etoile would not be the start of the war. It would be the checkmate. That night, Alexander came home late again. He looked tired, but energized, a strange combination she now understood. He had likely just left Serafina. He brought her a small bouquet of white roses. "For you, Izzy," he said, kissing her cheek. The scent of that other woman's perfume clung to his suit jacket. "Just thinking of you and our boy." Isabella accepted the flowers with a gentle smile. She held his gaze, her heart, a block of ice. "Thank you, darling. They're beautiful." Inside, she was screaming. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost surreal. He stood there, offering a token of his supposed affection, while actively dismantling their life and risking their son's future. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, a flicker of something guilt concern in his eyes. "You seem quiet." "Just a little tired," she said, placing a hand on her belly. "The baby has been kicking all day. He's a strong one." She let her words hang in the air, a subtle reminder of what he was betraying. He nodded, the flicker of guilt extinguished, replaced by a familiar dismissive confidence. "He's a Sterling. Of course he's strong." Isabella went to bed early, claiming fatigue. But she didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring into the darkness, her mind calm and clear. She felt no fear, only a profound and chilling sense of clarity. She was not the victim in this story. She was the arbiter. She was the one who would decide how it ended. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, the hopeful art historian swept off her feet by a charismatic billionaire. She had believed in fairy tales. Now she knew better. Life wasn't a fairy tale. It was a game of power. And she was about to show everyone, most of all her husband, that she knew how to win. Tuesday evening arrived with the cool, crisp air of a New York autumn. L'Etoile was located on a discreet side street in the East 60s, its entrance marked only by a single polished brass star on a mahogany door. There was no sign. You either knew about it or you didn't. It was a sanctuary for the city's elite, a place where privacy was the most expensive item on the menu. At 8:00 p.m., Alexander Sterling and Serafina Dubois were seated at the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth upholstered in deep crimson velvet. It offered a commanding view of the dining room, while remaining shrouded in intimate shadow. To any observer, they looked like the ultimate power couple. Alexander, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, leaned in his focus entirely on her. Serafina was a vision in black, a sleek, form-fitting dress that was both elegant and overtly sensual. Around her neck glittered the necklace of black diamonds, and ruby, a stark and stunning statement against her skin. They were laughing, sharing a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Alexander felt a thrill he hadn't felt in years. With Serafina, he wasn't just a husband or a CEO bound by legacy. He felt like a conqueror. She challenged him, excited him, and her ambition mirrored his own. He was utterly captivated, completely unaware that he was a fly, caught in a very sophisticated web. "The final bid for the Omnicore acquisition is going in tomorrow morning," he murmured, his voice low. "Thorne has no idea what our final number is. We're going to crush him." Serafina smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. She took a sip of her wine. "I have no doubt, darling. You always get what you want." She subtly checked her watch. She had a call scheduled with Marcus Thorne at 10 p.m. to give him that exact number. At 8:15 p.m., the mahogany door of L'Etoile opened. A hush seemed to fall over the front of the restaurant as Isabella Sterling entered. She was the personification of grace. The emerald green dress flowed around her, a splash of vibrant life in the dimly lit room. Her pearls glowed softly at her throat. Her hair was swept back in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was subtle, emphasizing her luminous eyes. She wasn't just pregnant. She was regal, a Madonna carrying the heir to a dynasty. The maitre d', a man named Jean-Pierre, who had managed the restaurant for 20 years and prided himself on his unflappable discretion, felt a jolt of pure panic. He rushed forward. "Mrs. Sterling!" What a wonderful surprise. We were not expecting you." Isabella gave him a warm, serene smile that did not reach her eyes. "Jean-Pierre, lovely to see you. I was just in the neighborhood and felt a sudden craving for your famous truffle risotto. I'm sure you can find a small table for me." Her tone was light, but her eyes scanned the room. Landing directly on the corner booth where her husband sat his back partially to her, Jean-Pierre began to sweat. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling, but perhaps a table by the window. It is quieter." He was trying to steer her away to avert a catastrophe. "No need to trouble yourself," Isabella said, her voice still gentle. "I see my husband is already here. What a lovely coincidence. I'll just join him." Before Jean-Pierre could protest, she began to walk. The journey across the dining room felt like 100 miles. Every eye was on her. The low hum of conversation faltered. People who recognized her, and in this room everyone did, froze with forks halfway to their mouths. They smelled blood in the water. This was better than theater. Alexander heard the shift in the room's atmosphere. He looked up from Serafina's face, annoyed by the distraction. His eyes followed the collective gaze. And then he saw her. For a moment, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a ghost. Isabella. Here. In their place. In her emerald dress, her pregnancy a statement of fact, walking directly toward them. A cold dread, heavy and absolute, washed over him. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was a nightmare. Serafina, seeing his expression, turned. Her eyes widened, her mask of sultry confidence cracking for a split second. She recovered quickly, her back stiffening, but the surprise was evident. Isabella reached the table. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hysterical. She smiled, a bright, social smile that was more terrifying than any scream. "Alexander, darling," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "Fancy seeing you here. I didn't know you had a business dinner tonight." Alexander was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from his pregnant wife to his mistress, trapped in the crimson booth, a spotlight of social horror shining directly on him. Isabella's gaze shifted to Serafina. She looked her up and down, a slow, appraising glance that took in the dress, the ambition in her eyes, and finally the necklace. "And you must be Serafina," Isabella said, her tone polite, as if meeting a new employee. "Alexander has told me so little about you." The subtle emphasis on little was a scalpel-sharp cut. She extended a hand. "Isabella Sterling, it's a pleasure to finally put a face to the name." Serafina, forced into the role of a business associate, had no choice but to take the offered hand. Isabella's grip was firm, her skin cool. "A pleasure to meet you," Serafina managed to say, her voice tight. "Don't get up," Isabella said, gesturing to the booth. She turned to the horrified Jean-Pierre, who was hovering nearby. "Could we get another chair, please? I'd love to join." It was not a request. It was a command. A trembling busboy scrambled to bring a chair, placing it at the head of the table directly between Alexander and Serafina. Isabella sat down gracefully, placing her clutch on the table. She smoothed her dress over her belly, an unconscious protective gesture that was also a powerful visual statement to the entire room. She was the wife, the mother of his child, the matriarch in waiting, and she was taking her seat at the table. The silence was deafening. Alexander finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Isabella, what are you doing here? I told you, darling, I was craving risotto," she said cheerfully. She turned to the waiter who had appeared ghost-like beside her. "I'll have the risotto and a sparkling water with a slice of lemon, please." She then looked back at her husband. "You know the baby gets the most peculiar cravings." She was orchestrating the entire scene with the skill of a seasoned conductor. She wasn't acknowledging the affair. She was simply and brutally ignoring it, steamrolling them with social grace. She had effectively demoted Serafina from a romantic rival to an awkward third wheel at a marital dinner. Isabella then turned her full attention back to Serafina. "That's a magnificent necklace," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Black diamonds are so wonderfully dramatic. Alexander has such specific taste." She paused, letting the words sink in. "In fact, it looks remarkably similar to a design I saw in a family lookbook. A sterling heirloom, I believe it was called the Nightfall Ruby, commissioned by Alexander's great-grandfather. Of course, this must be a modern interpretation. The original would be far too valuable for everyday wear." Serafina's hand instinctively went to the necklace. The implication was clear and devastating. Isabella was suggesting that the unique, expensive gift she wore was either a cheap copy of a family jewel, or worse, an actual heirloom that Alexander had stolen for his mistress. She had turned the symbol of their affair into a mark of shame. Alexander felt a wave of nausea. The necklace wasn't a family heirloom, but he had told Serafina it was spinning a tale to make the gift seem more significant, to bind her to him with history and legacy. Isabella somehow knew, or she was making an impossibly brilliant, cruel guess. Either way, he was exposed as both a cheat and a liar in a single, elegant sentence. He looked at Serafina. Her face was pale, her eyes burning with a mixture of fury and humiliation. She understood what was happening. She was being publicly dismissed, reduced to a tacky cliché. Isabella continued, her voice light and conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "So Serafina Alexander mentioned you're in the art world. So fascinating. We must have you consult on the new wing of the children's hospital the Foundation is building. We want it to be inspiring for the patients." She was offering Serafina a charity project. It was a perfectly pitched insult, framing her as someone who could be hired a vendor, while simultaneously reinforcing her own position as the philanthropic leader of the Sterling family. The humiliation was complete. Alexander Sterling, the titan of industry, sat trapped and emasculated. He could not yell at his pregnant wife in a room full of his peers. He could not comfort his mistress. He could do nothing but sit there and absorb the crushing weight of his own public disgrace. The other diners were no longer even pretending not to watch, their faces a mixture of shock and glee. Isabella's risotto arrived. She took a small, deliberate bite. "Delicious," she pronounced. She looked at her husband, her eyes for the first time losing their social sparkle and revealing a glimpse of the Arctic cold beneath. "You look pale, darling. Are you feeling all right?" Alexander didn't answer. He just stared at her, seeing his wife for the first time, not as a graceful accessory, but as a formidable, terrifying opponent who had just destroyed him without raising her voice. The meal, or what was left of it, ended in torturous silence. Isabella ate her risotto with a placid, unhurried enjoyment that was profoundly unnerving. Alexander and Serafina sat like stone figures, the expensive wine and half-eaten food growing cold on their plates. The air was thick with unspoken fury. Finally, Isabella placed her fork and knife down neatly. She dabbed her lips with her napkin, the picture of decorum. "Well, that was lovely," she said into the silence. She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Darling, I'll take a taxi. You two finish up your meeting." She gave Alexander a cool marital peck on the cheek, a final public assertion of her role. Then, with a slight dismissive nod to the seething Serafina, she turned and walked away. Her exit was as graceful and devastating as her entrance. The entire dining room watched her go, a collective sigh of released tension rippling through the space. Isabella Sterling had not caused a scene. She had become the scene. The moment the mahogany door closed behind her, Serafina's composure shattered. "What the hell was that, Alex?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She knew. She knew everything. She made me look like a fool, like some pathetic little tramp. Alexander finally snapped out of his stupor, his humiliation quickly curdling into rage. "Keep your voice down," he gritted out, throwing his napkin onto the table. "You think I wanted this? This was a calculated attack, a setup." She called my necklace a copy. Serafina's eyes blazed. "She offered me a charity job. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "Yes, I have some idea," he shot back, his voice rising. He was the one whose entire world had just been detonated in public. He threw several $100 bills onto the table, not even looking at the check. "Let's go. Now." The car ride to Serafina's apartment was a vortex of toxic anger. They tore into each other, the illusion of their perfect, powerful romance, disintegrating into ugly accusations. "How could you be so careless? How could she have known we'd be there?" Serafina demanded. "Don't you dare put this on me. This is your fault as much as mine. You and your ambition, pushing and pushing." "My ambition?" She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You loved my ambition 5 minutes ago." "Don't you try to paint me as the villain here, Alexander. You're the one who is married. You're the one who lied to me about that ridiculous necklace." He dropped her off at her building with a screech of tires. the argument unresolved, the air thick with the stench of betrayal and failure. As he sped away, his rage toward Serafina was already being eclipsed by a tidal wave of fury directed at Isabella. The quiet, supportive, predictable woman he thought he knew had just revealed a side to her that was utterly foreign and terrifying. She hadn't just confronted him, she had strategically disemboweled him. He stormed into their Park Avenue penthouse, ready for the screaming match of a lifetime. He found Isabella in the living room, calmly sipping a cup of chamomile tea. She was no longer wearing the emerald dress, having changed into a simple cream-colored cashmere robe. She looked up as he entered, her expression placid. "You're home early," she said quietly. The dam of his anger broke. What the hell was that, Isabella? What was that disgusting theatrical display? Do you have any idea what you've done? "Yes," she replied, her voice losing its softness and taking on a steely edge. "I believe I do. I revealed the truth in a manner you couldn't lie your way out of, though I'm sure you will try. You humiliated me. You made a spectacle of our private life in front of everyone." Isabella set her teacup down with a soft click. She finally stood up, facing him. For the first time, he saw the depth of the cold fury in her eyes. The gentle, forgiving woman he had taken for granted was gone. In her place was a stranger. "You," she said, her voice dangerously low, "humiliated me the moment you chose to break your vows. You humiliated me with every lie, every late night, every secret call. You humiliated our marriage, our family, and our unborn son. My spectacle, as you call it, was merely holding a mirror up to your disgrace. Do not for 1 second confuse my actions with your own." "This is about that woman, isn't it? It's jealousy." Isabella let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of all humor. "Jealousy? Oh, Alexander, you are so breathtakingly arrogant. You think this is about her? She is a symptom, a vulgar, ambitious symptom of your own weakness. She means nothing to me." She walked over to her desk and picked up a slim folder. It was the report from Chloe's investigation. She tossed it onto the marble coffee table between them. "This is what this is about." He opened it. His blood ran cold. Photos, timestamps, hotel receipts. A detailed report on Serafina Dubois, including her past in corporate espionage and her recent frequent contact with Marcus Thorne. "She's playing you, you fool." Isabella's voice cut through his shock. "She's been feeding information to Thorne for months. I imagine she was planning to call him tonight with your secret bid number for Omnicore, wasn't she?" Alexander stared at the papers, his world tilting on its axis. The affair was one thing. This was a betrayal of a different magnitude. It was a dagger aimed at the heart of his company, his legacy. And he had handed it to her himself. He felt like an idiot, a colossal, pathetic fool. I didn't know," he stammered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a sickening dread. "No," Isabella agreed, her voice relentless. "You didn't, because you weren't thinking with your head. You were so wrapped up in your sordid little fantasy that you failed to see the viper in your bed. You put this entire company, your father's life's work, your son's inheritance, at risk. For what? For her." He sank onto the sofa, the full weight of his catastrophic misjudgment crashing down on him. He had been played, manipulated, and utterly compromised. He looked up at Isabella, a desperate plea forming in his eyes. He expected to see triumph, but he saw only icy resolve. This wasn't the end of her attack. It was just the beginning. "This changes things, Izzy," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thorn, we have to stop him. We have to work together." Isabella gave him a pitying look. "There is no we, Alexander. Not anymore. You seem to be under the impression that you are still in a position to negotiate." She retrieved another document from her desk. She held it out to him. It was a copy of their prenuptial agreement, the infidelity clause highlighted in yellow. "As of my discovery of your affair, which is now meticulously documented and can be corroborated by at least half of New York's elite society, thanks to your dinner tonight, this clause is in effect. My shares in Sterling Global are now voting shares. I have unilateral control over our son's trust, and I have the right to appoint 2 new members to the Foundation's board." Alexander stared at the paper, his mind reeling. He remembered signing it, laughing it off as a formality for her father. He had never imagined it would be used. It was a corporate coup hidden within their marriage vows. "You can't," he whispered. "That would destabilize everything." "On the contrary," Isabella said, her voice like ice, "it will stabilize it. Because unlike you, I will not put this family's legacy at risk for a cheap thrill. I will protect it. You have proven you are unfit to be the sole guardian of it." The full, terrifying scope of her plan was finally dawning on him. The dinner wasn't just about humiliating him. It was about creating incontrovertible public evidence to trigger the prenup. It was a brilliant, ruthless, and perfectly executed maneuver. "Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., she continued, "I'm meeting with your father. I will be presenting him with 2 things. The first is this folder detailing your gross negligence and the existential threat you have exposed the company to. The second will be my proposal for the way forward." "What proposal?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "My proposal," Isabella stated, her gaze unwavering, "is that you will take a voluntary, indefinite leave of absence as CEO of Sterling Global. You will check into a wellness retreat in Switzerland to reevaluate your priorities. The board, influenced by my new voting power and your father's fury, will agree. An interim CEO will be appointed. Julian, perhaps. He is loyal to the family, not just to you." It was a complete and total annihilation. She wasn't just divorcing him or taking his money. She was stripping him of his identity, his power, his throne. She was exiling him. He looked at the woman standing before him. The warm, loving wife was gone, replaced by a queen executing a flawless palace coup. He had mistaken her grace for weakness. He had mistaken her silence for submission. He had underestimated her at every turn, and now he was paying the ultimate price. He wasn't just humiliated. He was shattered. The 9 a.m. meeting in Charles Sterling's office was less of a conversation and more of a sentencing. The office itself was a shrine to corporate power. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and a view of the city from the 80th floor that made the world look small and conquerable. Charles, a man in his late 60s with his son's sharp features etched into a sterner, more unforgiving mask, sat behind his enormous desk. He had already read the folder Isabella had sent over via a secure courier an hour earlier. His face was granite. Isabella, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue suit, sat opposite him. She did not present her case with emotion or hysterics. She laid out the facts with the cool, detached precision of a corporate lawyer. She detailed Alexander's affair, Seraphina's connection to Marcus Thorne, and the imminent danger to the Omnicore acquisition. She finished by sliding a copy of the now activated prenuptial agreement across the desk. "He has become a liability to the family and to the company," she stated simply. "His judgment is compromised, Action must be taken. Charles was silent for a long time, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. He was a man who valued two things above all else: legacy and control. His son had threatened both. The affair was a private disgrace, but the corporate espionage was a cardinal sin. "The gala is in 2 weeks," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "It is our most important public event of the year." "I am aware," Isabella replied, "which is why Alexander's leave of absence must begin immediately. The story will be one of exhaustion of a dedicated CEO taking a much-needed rest on his doctor's advice before the birth of his firstborn. It's clean. It's believable. I will preside over the gala in his stead alongside you. We will present a united front for the family." Charles looked at his daughter-in-law, truly seeing her for the first time. He had always approved of her. She was poised, intelligent, from a good family. But he, like his son, had mistaken her quiet nature for passivity. He now saw the mind of a strategist and the will of a monarch. She wasn't just trying to punish his son. She was actively preserving the empire. In a twisted way, he was enforced. She was more of a sterling than his own son had been. "And what of Seraphina Dubois and Marcus Thorne?" he asked. "Leave them to me," Isabella said, a glint in her eye. "I believe they are about to have a very bad day." While Isabella met with Charles Alexander's world was collapsing. His frantic calls to Seraphina went to voicemail. Finally, a single text message came through. "Don't contact me again. My arrangement with Thorne is terminated. Your poison." She was cutting her losses, a rat deserting a sinking ship. Then the call came from his father's office. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. The confrontation between father and son was brutal. Charles did not yell. He expressed his disappointment with a quiet, lethal contempt that was far worse than any tirade. He laid out Isabella's terms not as a proposal, but as a foregone conclusion. Alexander tried to argue to defend himself, but his words were empty. He had no leverage. He had been outmaneuvered by his wife and condemned by his father. By noon, his exile was official. The board was informed, the press release drafted. Alexander Sterling, the king of New York real estate, was gone. Isabella's next move was surgical. Using the information from the PI, she sent an anonymous, encrypted package to the board of directors of Thorne Industries. It contained proof of the corporate espionage scheme, detailing Seraphina's role as an industrial mole and evidence that Marcus Thorne had sanctioned it. She included a subtle hint that this information could easily find its way to the SEC. Thorne, a ruthless but not stupid man, would be forced to clean house to avoid a federal investigation. Seraphina's career as a corporate weapon was over. Her gallery, funded by powerful men she had now alienated, would likely wither and die within a year. Isabella had dismantled her rival without ever speaking her name again. 2 weeks later, the Sterling Foundation Gala took place. It was the social event of the season, and the gossip about Alexander's sudden sabbatical was the main topic of conversation. Isabella arrived on the arm of her father-in-law Charles. She was a vision of radiant power. She wore a gown of shimmering silver custom-made to accentuate her pregnancy. She dripped with the real Sterling family jewels, including the genuine Nightfall ruby necklace. She moved through the room with an unassailable confidence, greeting senators, billionaires, and cultural icons. She gave a speech that was both heartfelt and powerful, speaking of legacy family and the future, her son's future. She never mentioned Alexander's name once. It was a masterful performance. She wasn't just the CEO's wife anymore. She was the regent, the keeper of the throne. She had won. It wasn't a victory that brought her joy, but one that brought security. She had protected her child's future and her family's legacy from the recklessness of the man she had once loved. Her marriage was in ruins, but her life was her own. She held all the cards. Alexander was in a luxury clinic in the Swiss Alps, cut off and powerless, forced to confront the wreckage he had made of his life. Whether he could ever earn his way back, not to the head of the company, but to a place in his family, was a question only Isabella could answer. As she stood on the stage, looking out at the powerful faces watching her, one hand resting on her swollen belly, she felt a profound sense of peace. The gilded cage had been broken, not by escaping it, but by seizing control of it. The quiet wife had become a queen, and her reign was just beginning. In the world of the powerful, betrayal is often just another move on the chessboard. But what we've just witnessed is the story of a queen who refused to be a pawn. Isabella Sterling's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. She reclaimed her power, her dignity, and the future of her family, not with screams and threats, but with intelligence, strategy, and an unbreakable will. She reminds us that true strength isn't always the loudest voice in the room, but often the quietest mind, the one that sees the entire board while others only see their next move. What did you think of Isabella's ultimate power move? Was she justified, or was her takedown too brutal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of drama, intrigue, and empowerment, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who would appreciate a tale of epic consequences, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger than fiction. What if everything you knew, your marriage, your future, your identity, was built on a lie? Ethan Hayes was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, a tech genius with charm to spare. Olivia was his dazzling wife, 7 months pregnant, and the envy of everyone who knew her. But one stormy Tuesday afternoon, Olivia came home early, and what she saw shattered everything. This isn't a story about heartbreak, it's about what came after. A plan so bold, so ruthlessly clever, it flipped the rules of revenge and power on their heads. This is the moment she stopped being the victim and became something else entirely. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. If emotional stories speak to you, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. You won't want to miss this one. Let's dive into it. The Hayes' residence on Crestview Drive was a monument to modern success. A symphony of glass, steel, and polished concrete, it cantilevered over the Emerald Hills overlooking the city, a testament to the architectural genius of its owner, Olivia Hayes, and the financial might of her husband, Ethan. From the infinity pool that bled into the horizon, you could watch the city lights glitter like a fallen constellation. It was a house that whispered, "We've made it." And they had. Ethan Hayes, at 34, was the golden boy of the tech world. His company, InnovateX, had revolutionized data security with an algorithm he'd coded in his dorm room a decade ago. He was sharp, impossibly charismatic, and possessed a restless energy that seemed to power the city itself. He was the man on the cover of Forbes, the speaker at every major tech conference, the husband who still looked at his wife like she was the only woman in the world. Olivia, at 32, was his perfect counterpart. An acclaimed architect from a family of academics, she possessed a quiet strength and an artist's eye. She saw the world in lines, angles, and potential. She had designed their home, not as a showpiece, but as a sanctuary. Every room was meant to frame a view, to capture the light, to create a feeling of serene, unbreachable peace. Now, that peace was about to be shattered. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a boy. The pregnancy had softened her edges, filling her with a profound and joyful sense of purpose that eclipsed even her professional accolades. Today, she was coming home early from her final site visit before maternity leave, a file tucked under her arm containing the sonogram from her morning appointment. She'd had them print an extra copy, a perfect black and white profile of their son, which she planned to frame for Ethan's desk as a surprise. The rain began to fall as her Tesla whispered up the long, winding driveway. It was a soft, melancholic drizzle that blurred the edges of the manicured gardens. The house stood silent, its vast windows like dark, unblinking eyes. Ethan was supposed to be in back-to-back meetings downtown until 7. It was only 3 o'clock. She felt a small, pleasant thrill at the thought of having the house to herself for a few hours, to curl up in the reading nook overlooking the valley and just be. She keyed in the code, the electronic lock chirping its familiar welcome. The air inside was different. Still. Too still. The faint, cloying scent of a perfume she didn't recognize hung in the air. A floral note. Jasmine, maybe? That was too sweet. Too aggressive for their minimalist home. A prickle of unease traced its way up her spine. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice absorbed by the cavernous space of the great room. No answer. A pair of women's shoes lay discarded near the base of the floating staircase. They were Louboutins, the iconic red soles a slash of crimson against the pale gray of the polished concrete floor. Not hers. Olivia's own sensible flats felt suddenly clumsy, childish. Her heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. She walked past the kitchen, her hand trailing along the cool marble of the island. A half-empty bottle of champagne, Veuve Clicquot, their celebration champagne, sat sweating beside 2 flutes. One had a smear of coral pink lipstick on the rim. Denial is a powerful anesthetic. A client meeting, she told herself. He brought a client home. He forgot to tell me. But the shoes, the champagne, the cloying perfume, they were weaving a narrative she couldn't ignore. The silence from upstairs was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. Her feet felt like lead as she ascended the staircase, her hand gripping the cool steel of the railing. Each step was a lifetime. The sonogram photo in the file felt suddenly cold, a relic from another existence. The door to their master bedroom was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see a silk blouse, the color of champagne, draped over the Eames chair in the corner. Then, a man's shirt, one of Ethan's custom-made charvets, lying in a heap beside it. And then, she heard it. A sound that would be burned into her memory forever. A soft feminine laugh, quickly muffled, followed by the low murmur of her husband's voice. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. The blood rushed in her ears, a roaring ocean. Her carefully constructed world, her sanctuary of glass and light, was fracturing around her. With a hand that trembled so violently she could barely control it, she pushed the door open. The scene before her was a tableau from a nightmare. The vast floor-to-ceiling window behind their bed framed the rainy cityscape, a backdrop of muted grays and blues. But Olivia's eyes were fixed on the bed itself, on the tangled mess of white linen sheets, on the pale, naked back of a woman with long, dark hair spread across her pillow, and on her husband, Ethan, who was propped up on one elbow, leaning over the woman, whispering something that made her laugh again. He turned his head at the sound of the door swinging open. His eyes met Olivia's. For a single, eternal second, the world stopped. The smile on Ethan's face didn't just vanish. It was wiped away, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His face went white, then a blotchy red. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own death. The The woman beneath him, sensing the sudden tension, rolled over. Olivia knew her. Chloe Sterling. A rising star in InnovateX's marketing department. Ambitious, sharp, and young. So young. She was 26, maybe 27. She had been at their Christmas party, laughing and telling Olivia how much she admired her work. Now, she was in Olivia's bed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, clutching the sheet to her chest. The silence was broken only by the sound of the file slipping from Olivia's numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft thud. The sonogram photo slid out, landing face up, the tiny, perfect profile of their unborn son, a silent witness to his father's betrayal. Ethan scrambled from the bed, grabbing for his discarded trousers. "Liv," he stammered, his voice a raw, broken thing. Olivia. Oh God, it's not what it looks like. The sheer, pathetic stupidity of the cliché was what finally broke through Olivia's shock. A sound tore from her throat, a laugh that was half a sob, half a scream. It was the sound of a heart breaking. "It's not what it looks like," she repeated, her voice eerily calm, devoid of inflection. She looked from her husband's panicked face to the woman in her bed, then down at the picture of their son on the floor. "Really, Ethan? Then tell me. Tell me what it looks like. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're fucking a subordinate in our bed. In the house I built for us. While your pregnant wife is at a doctor's appointment, looking at pictures of our child." Every word was a shard of ice. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. That would come later. Right now, a strange glacial clarity was descending upon her. She was an architect watching a demolition. The structure was compromised. The foundation was gone. The only thing to do was to step back and assess the wreckage. Chloe Sterling, seeing her opportunity, scurried from the bed, gathering her clothes with frantic, clumsy movements. She wouldn't look at Olivia. She couldn't. She was a ghost, an intruder, and she knew it. "Get out," Olivia said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with steel. Her gaze was fixed on the younger woman. "Get your things and get out of my house." Chloe fumbled with her blouse, her hands shaking. She shot a desperate, pleading look at Ethan, who could only stand there, paralyzed by his own guilt. He was powerless. In that moment, he was no longer the millionaire tech mogul. He was just a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and his mother had just walked in. Without another word, Chloe fled, her red-soled heels clattering down the floating staircase, a sound like frantic, fading heartbeats. The front door opened and closed, and then silence again. A new kind of silence, thick with shame and the ghosts of broken vows. Olivia finally looked back at Ethan. He stood before her, half-dressed, a pathetic figure against the backdrop of their magnificent life. The rain streamed down the glass wall behind him, as if the sky itself were weeping for her. "Liv, please," he begged, taking a step toward her. "Let me explain. We can fix this. I can fix this." Olivia bent down, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were moving through water. Her hand was steady as she picked up the sonogram photo. She held it up, her eyes locking with his. "Fix this?" she whispered, and the whisper was more terrifying than any shout. "You think this is a bug in your code, Ethan? Something you can just patch and reboot?" She looked around the room. Her sanctuary. The jasmine-scented air was now a poison. The bed was a crime scene. The house itself felt tainted, its beautiful clean lines now seeming to mock her. She turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving him standing in the wreckage. She walked down the stairs, past the lipstick-stained champagne flute, and out the front door into the rain. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't be in that glass house for one more second, because it had just become her prison. And as the cold rain soaked her clothes, mingling with the hot, silent tears that finally began to fall, she made a vow. He had torn down her world. Now, she would build a new one. And he would watch. The first 48 hours were a blur of managed chaos. Olivia didn't go to her parents or her sister. She didn't call her best friend and unload in a torrent of tears. To do so would be to make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. It would invite pity, and pity was a luxury she could not afford. Pity was quicksand. Instead, she drove to the Four Seasons in the city, checked into a suite under her maiden name, and turned off her phone. For 2 days, she existed in the sterile, anonymous luxury of the hotel room. She ordered room service she didn't eat. She took baths that went cold. She sat on the balcony, wrapped in a thick hotel robe, and watched the rain lash against the window. Her mind a maelstrom of grief, rage, and a terrifying, hollow emptiness. The architect in her saw the demolition in stark, brutal detail. The foundation of trust pulverized, the support beams of shared dreams snapped, the glass walls of their future shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Ethan, predictably, fell apart. He left dozens of voicemails, swinging wildly from panicked apologies to desperate declarations of love. He sent texts that read like frantic, disjointed prayers. He had security try to track her credit card, but she had paid for the hotel in cash. He was a man who could control global data streams, but he couldn't find his own wife. The loss of control was driving him mad. On the third morning, Olivia woke up, and the storm inside her had passed. In its place was a cold, hard, and unnervingly calm resolve. The grief was still there, a solid, heavy weight in her chest, but it was no longer in control. She was. She had cried all her tears. Now it was time to draw up a new blueprint. She turned her phone back on and was immediately assaulted by the barrage of notifications. She ignored them all, except one, an email from her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jessica Albright, whom she had contacted from the hotel's business center. The subject line was simple. Initial assessment. Olivia spent the next hour on the phone with Jessica, her voice low and steady. She laid out the facts with the dispassionate precision of a contractor listing damages. There was no hysteria, no wailing. Jessica, who had handled the ugliest divorces in the city, was audibly impressed. "Most women in your position are emotional wrecks," Jessica said. "They want to burn everything to the ground. It's satisfying for a minute, but it's terrible strategy." "I'm not interested in revenge, Jessica," Olivia replied, her gaze fixed on the cityscape outside her window. "Revenge is an emotional decision. I'm interested in building. I need assets, I need security, and I need autonomy. For me, and for my son." "Good," Jessica said. "That I can work with. So we file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. With the prenup, you're entitled to the house, a significant settlement, and generous child support. We can bleed him dry." Olivia was silent for a moment. The obvious path. The clean break. Leave with her millions and her broken heart, and raise her son alone. It was the expected move. And that's why she wasn't going to do it. A divorce would be a war, a public spectacle. The media would have a field day. Tech moguls' messy split. Their lives would be picked apart by strangers. Ethan, cornered and humiliated, would fight back. It would be long, ugly, and draining. And in the end, she would still be Olivia Hayes, the millionaire's scorned ex-wife. Her identity would forever be tied to his betrayal. No, she wouldn't be a footnote in Ethan's story. She was going to be the author of her own. "No," Olivia said, her voice firm. "We're not filing for divorce." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Olivia, I'm not sure I understand. He cheated on you. In your home. While you're pregnant." "I'm aware of the facts, Jessica," Olivia said coolly. "A divorce is what he expects. It's what everyone expects. It gives him an easy out. He pays his dues, suffers some public shame, and in a year he's back on the cover of Forbes with a new, younger woman on his arm, having learned a valuable lesson. I'm not interested in giving him his redemption arc." She took a deep breath. I have a different proposal. A business arrangement. Ethan was pacing the great room of the glass house like a caged animal when she finally walked in. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot. His designer stubble was now a ragged beard, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd had on 2 days ago. The house, usually immaculate, was a mess. Glasses were left out. Cushions were askew. It was as if the chaos in his soul had manifested in the space around him. He stopped dead when he saw her. "Liv! Oh God, Liv!" He rushed toward her, his hands outstretched. Olivia held up a single hand, stopping him in his tracks. Her gesture was not dramatic. It was definitive. A wall had just been erected between them, as real as any she had ever designed. "Don't," she said. Her voice was flat. "Sit down, Ethan. We need to talk." He looked utterly lost, but he obeyed, sinking onto the white leather sofa that suddenly seemed too big for him. Olivia remained standing, a deliberate power move. She placed a sleek, leather-bound folder on the coffee table between them. "I've spent the last 2 days thinking," she began, her tone that of a CEO opening a board meeting. "I've considered all our options. Divorce is the most obvious one." Hope, pathetic and desperate, flickered in his eyes. "Liv, we don't have to. We can go to therapy. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll sell the company. Whatever it takes." She gave a small, humorless smile. "You're not listening, Ethan. I said I've considered it. I've decided against it. For now." His relief was palpable. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "This is not a reconciliation. This is a contract. A new prenup, if you will, for a marriage that is now, for all intents and purposes, a business partnership." She slid the folder across the table. "Open it." With trembling hands, he did. Inside were documents drafted by Jessica Albright's firm. It wasn't a divorce filing. It was a post-nuptial agreement, a blueprint for a new reality. Olivia began to speak, outlining the terms as he scanned the pages in disbelief. "1," she said, "we will remain married. We will maintain a public front of unity for the sake of the company's stability and for our son. We will attend events together. We will smile for the cameras. In this house, however, we will live entirely separate lives. You will move into the guest wing. You will not enter my side of the house, which includes the master suite and the nursery, without my express permission." He looked up, his face ashen. Olivia, 2, she continued, ignoring him. "All our joint liquid assets will be transferred into a trust for our son, which I will solely manage. Your salary, your bonuses, your stock dividends, they will be split. 50% goes into the trust. 40% goes into a private account in my name. You will live on the remaining 10%. He flinched as if she had slapped him. 10% of his income was still a fortune, but it was the principal. It was a punishment, an allowance. 3, she said, her voice dropping slightly as she came to the most important point. You will cede full control and ownership of the Blackwood Project to me, effective immediately. The Blackwood Project was Ethan's forgotten pet project, a dilapidated, historically significant warehouse district downtown that InnovateX had bought years ago with the vague intention of turning it into a new tech campus. But the project was a logistical nightmare, zoning issues, heritage building restrictions, environmental surveys. Ethan, ever the innovator, had gotten bored with the slow grind of real estate development and had shelved it. But Olivia had never forgotten it. She had seen the potential in the old brick buildings, the beautiful industrial bones beneath the grime. She had a vision for it. A mixed-use urban village with sustainable housing, artisan workshops, green spaces, and a community arts hub. It was ambitious. It was her dream project. Ethan stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't just about money. You want Blackwood? He whispered, incredulous. I want more than that, she said. The project is currently owned by an InnovateX subsidiary. You will sign over the subsidiary to a new holding company in my name. You will also provide the initial seed capital for redevelopment, as outlined on page 7. $50 million. He choked. 50 million? Liv, that's not seed capital. That's the entire projected budget. It's the price of my silence, Ethan, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. It's the price of me standing by your side at the next shareholders' meeting instead of standing beside a divorce attorney. It's the price of the world continuing to see you as Ethan Hayes, the family man and tech genius, instead of Ethan Hayes, the adulterer who destroyed his pregnant wife. She leaned forward slightly. You built your empire on code. I am an architect. I build things in the real world, with steel and concrete and glass. You've given me a pile of rubble. Now, you're going to give me the tools to build something new from it, something that is entirely mine. He looked down at the papers, then back up at her. He was seeing a woman he didn't recognize. The warm, loving artist he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable strategist with a will of iron. He had broken her heart, and in doing so, he had forged it into a weapon. And Chloe Sterling? He asked, his voice barely audible. She's to be fired, Olivia stated, without a flicker of emotion. With a generous severance package and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, she is to vanish from our lives. If I ever see her, hear her name, or smell her perfume again, this deal is off the table, and Jessica Albright will unleash hell. Is that clear? He nodded, defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He was looking at the consequences of his actions, not in tears and screams, but in cold, hard, legally binding print. This is my blueprint, Ethan, Olivia said, standing up straight. These are my terms. You have 24 hours to have your lawyers review it and sign. If you refuse, or if you try to negotiate a single clause, I will walk out that door, and the next time you hear from me will be via a court summons that will be the lead story on every news outlet by lunchtime. She turned and walked toward the grand staircase, her posture perfect, her steps even. She was no longer a victim fleeing a crime scene. She was a queen reclaiming her castle. At the top of the stairs, she paused and looked back at him, a solitary figure adrift in the vast, beautiful room she had designed. Welcome to our new marriage, Ethan, she said, her voice echoing in the silent house. I hope you enjoy the guest wing. The 24 hours Olivia gave Ethan stretched into an eternity. He did as she commanded, his movements automated, his mind numb. He called his lawyer, a corporate shark named Marcus Thorne, who listened to the terms of Olivia's post-nup with a mixture of disbelief and professional admiration. My God, Ethan, Marcus said, a low whistle escaping his lips. She's not taking you to the cleaners. She's taking the whole damn laundromat. The Blackwood subsidiary, $50 million in seed capital. This isn't a post-nup. It's a corporate takeover executed with a scalpel. Just tell me if it's legal, Marcus, Ethan said, his voice flat. He was sitting in the guest wing, which felt like a sterile, foreign country. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of Olivia moving around in the main part of the house. The soft click of a door. The rush of water. Each sound was a reminder of the chasm that now separated them. Oh, it's ironclad, Marcus confirmed. Albright is the best. There's a duress clause, of course, but trying to prove she coerced you would mean airing every last piece of your dirty laundry in public, which is precisely what this document is designed to prevent. It's brilliant, in a terrifying sort of way. You're trapped, Ethan. She's checkmated you. Ethan knew it. He had spent his life building systems of control, algorithms that anticipated every move, every possibility. But he had never anticipated this. He had never factored in the variable of Olivia's strength, a quiet force he had mistaken for fragility. He had thought her love was a given, a constant in his equation. He now understood it had been a gift, one he had carelessly thrown away. He signed the papers. The first few weeks of their new arrangement were a masterclass in cold civility. They were ghosts haunting the same magnificent house. Ethan would rise early and leave before she came downstairs. He would return late after she had retired to the master suite, the door firmly closed. The only evidence of their shared space was the occasional note left on the kitchen island, a reminder about a bill, a question about the InnovateX gala they were now contractually obligated to attend together. Their public appearances were flawless performances. At the gala, Olivia was radiant in a custom-designed gown that elegantly draped over her 8-month belly. She stood by his side, a serene smile on her face, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple, on the cusp of welcoming their first child. The whispers about Chloe Sterling's abrupt departure from the company were quickly silenced by the sheer force of their united front. But as Ethan stood beside her, smiling for the cameras, he felt a cold dread. Her touch was weightless, impersonal. Her smile never reached her eyes. He was standing next to a beautiful, brilliant stranger who knew all his secrets. He would catch a glimpse of her across a crowded room, laughing with a city council member or discussing blueprints with a developer, and he would be struck by a profound and painful longing. He wasn't just losing his wife, he was witnessing her rebirth, and he was no part of it. Olivia, meanwhile, threw herself into the Blackwood project with a ferocity that stunned everyone. She set up a small, lean office in one of the less dilapidated warehouses, a stark contrast to the gleaming towers of InnovateX. The space smelled of old brick, damp earth, and potential. This was her territory. She didn't hire a massive team. She handpicked a small group of hungry, innovative thinkers. A young urban planner who specialized in sustainable design, a gruff but brilliant structural engineer who had been forced into early retirement, and a fiery community organizer who knew the neighborhood block by block. She was not Olivia Hayes, the wife of a tech mogul. Here, she was just Olivia, the architect. She was on site every day, her pregnancy be damned, climbing over rubble in steel-toed boots, her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied old city maps and new environmental reports. She was in her element. The project was more than just steel and concrete. It was her reclamation. Every zoning permit she secured, every blueprint she finalized, was a piece of her shattered identity being put back together, stronger and more resilient than before. Ethan watched from a distance, his 10% life feeling hollow and absurd. He received daily reports from the Blackwood subsidiary's new CFO, a woman loyal to Olivia, detailing the project's progress and expenditures. He saw the $50 million he had signed over being meticulously allocated, and it felt like watching his own blood being transfused into a new, vibrant body that was not his. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. He found Olivia in the kitchen, a place she usually avoided when he was there. She was standing at the island, looking over a large blueprint, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She didn't seem to notice him. She was completely absorbed, her face alive with a passion he hadn't seen in years, not since she had been designing their own home. "It's going to have a public park in the center," she said softly, more to herself than to him, "with a bioswale to manage rainwater runoff, and the south-facing roofs will all be solar." He stood in the doorway, a silent observer. "Liv," he said, his voice hoarse. She looked up, startled. Her face immediately became guarded, the professional mask snapping back into place. "Ethan, I thought you had a dinner meeting." "It was canceled," he said. He took a hesitant step into the room. "I saw the latest progress report. It's impressive." "It's a sound investment," she replied coolly, rolling up the blueprint. The air was thick with unspoken words. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. Not just for the affair, but for everything. For not seeing her. For taking her for granted. For letting the shine of his own success blind him to the brilliance of hers. But the words were stuck in his throat, choked by the terms of their contract. Apologies were not part of the deal. "Our son," he began, his voice cracking slightly, He's due soon. In 3 weeks, she confirmed, her hand moving to her stomach in an unconscious, protective gesture. I want to be there, he said, the words rushing out. At the birth. I know the terms of our arrangement, but he's my son too. Please, Olivia. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. He saw a flicker of the old Olivia, the woman he had married, a flash of vulnerability in her eyes before the architect's mask descended again. You will be there, she said finally, her voice devoid of warmth. It's important for the narrative. The devoted father. It's good for the brand. The words hit him like a physical blow. The brand, their marriage, their child, all reduced to a marketing strategy. It was a cruelty so precise, so perfectly aimed, he knew he deserved it. 3 weeks later, Leo Hayes was born. Ethan was there, as promised. He held Olivia's hand, not as her husband, but as a silent partner in a joint venture. He cut the umbilical cord, his hands shaking, and when the nurse placed the tiny, screaming baby in his arms, his world tilted on its axis. He looked at his son, his perfect, innocent son, and then at Olivia, her face pale and exhausted, but filled with a fierce, primal love that was directed solely at the child in her arms. In that moment, Ethan understood the true extent of his loss. He hadn't just broken a marriage, he had forfeited a family. He had his name on the birth certificate. He had a room waiting in the guest wing of the house. But he was a father with no rights, a husband with no wife, a king in a glass castle, utterly and completely alone. And across the city, in a dusty warehouse district, the foundation for his wife's new empire was being laid, brick by painful brick. The first year of Leo's life passed in a structured, carefully managed rhythm dictated entirely by Olivia. The glass house was no longer a home. It was a high-end co-parenting facility. Ethan's access to his son was laid out in a shared digital calendar with the cold precision of a business schedule. Leo time, 7 Kanze IM, 8:30 a.m., and Leo story, time, 6 Hans p.m., 6:45 p.m. During these allotted slots, Ethan would emerge from the guest wing and enter the main house, his heart pounding with a mixture of love and trepidation. Olivia was usually present, a silent, watchful supervisor. She would sit in a nearby armchair, ostensibly reading a report or answering emails on her tablet, but he knew her attention was fixed on him. He felt like an intern on probation. He learned to parent under a microscope. He became an expert at changing diapers, warming bottles, and mastering the gentle rocking motion that soothed Leo's cries. He did it all with a desperate, clumsy tenderness. These brief, rationed moments with his son were the only real thing in his life. The rest was a charade, running a company he no longer cared about, living on an allowance that felt like a mockery, and sleeping in a bed that was a nightly reminder of his exile. He saw the man he used to be with sickening clarity. The arrogance, the entitlement, the casual cruelty of his betrayal. He had believed his own hype, thinking the rules didn't apply to him. Now, he was living in a world of rules, all of them written by the woman whose heart he had shattered. Meanwhile, Olivia thrived. Motherhood did not slow her down. It focused her. She was a force of nature, seamlessly blending the roles of doting mother and ruthless developer. She'd be on a conference call negotiating the price of reclaimed timber while bouncing Leo on her hip, her voice never wavering. Her small office at the Blackwood site expanded, and the project, which she had officially named Blackwood Commons, was becoming the talk of the city. It was more than a development. It was a statement. She had rejected the cold, sterile aesthetic of modern tech campuses in favor of something warm, human, and sustainable. She prioritized local artisans, insisted on green building materials, and designed public spaces that encouraged community interaction. She was building the anti-Innovate-X, the anti-Ethan. And it was beautiful. The press, which had once fawned over Ethan, was now captivated by Olivia. She was the rising star, the visionary architect creating a new heart for the city. They called her the architect of the future. In interviews, she was poised and brilliant. When asked about her husband, she would smile serenely and say, "Ethan is incredibly supportive. He's a wonderful father, and his belief in this project has made it all possible. Each public declaration of his support was a perfectly sharpened knife for Ethan. He was a prop in her success story, the silent, check-writing husband in the background. He had wanted to be the hero of his own story, but he was now a supporting character in hers." The first major crack in their carefully constructed arrangement appeared 18 months after Leo's birth. The Blackwood Commons was entering its most critical phase of construction, and Olivia was working around the clock. She was leveraged to the hilt, having poured every cent of the initial seed capital and secured massive loans based on the project's future earnings. The crisis came from an unexpected quarter. A powerful, old-money real estate magnate, a man named Alistair Finch, had been quietly buying up properties surrounding the Blackwood site. Finch was a dinosaur of the old school. He built monolithic glass towers and had no patience for Olivia's artisanal nonsense. He saw her success as a threat to his dominance. Finch launched a hostile campaign. He used his influence at City Hall to challenge her zoning variances, tying her up in bureaucratic red tape. He filed frivolous environmental lawsuits, forcing costly delays. He poached 2 of her key contractors with offers they couldn't refuse. It was a war of attrition, designed to bleed her dry and force her to sell the project to him for pennies on the dollar. Olivia fought back with everything she had. She worked later, pushed harder, her face etched with a familiar stress that Ethan recognized. He saw her one night, long after Leo was asleep, staring at a spreadsheet on her laptop, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The invincible architect looked, for the first time, vulnerable. He found himself hovering in the doorway of the great room. Their contract forbade him from interfering in her business. It was her empire, her fight. But watching her struggle, watching this old vulture try to tear down the beautiful thing she was building, ignited a protective instinct he thought he had lost. "It's Finch, isn't it?" he said softly. She looked up, her eyes flashing with anger, as if his presence were an intrusion on her private pain. "This is my concern, Ethan. It has nothing to do with you." "He's trying to break you," Ethan continued, taking a step into the room. "He's using delay tactics to trigger the penalty clauses in your loan agreements. If you miss your completion deadline, the interest rates will skyrocket. He's trying to force a default." She stared at him, surprised by the accuracy of his analysis. She had forgotten that beneath the wreckage of their marriage lay the mind of a brilliant strategist. "My lawyers are handling it," she said stiffly, turning back to her screen. "Your lawyers are litigators. You don't need a lawyer right now, Olivia. You need a weapon," he said. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a stylus and a tablet. He began sketching, not lines of a building, but a web of connections, a flowchart of power. "Finch Consolidated is a publicly traded company," he said, his voice gaining the old energy and focus she remembered. "But his real power comes from his private equity firm, Finch Capital. It's a black box, but it's not infallible." He started talking about shell corporations, leveraging minority shareholder positions, and launching a proxy fight. He spoke of data analytics, of finding Finch's digital pressure points. It was the language of corporate warfare, a language he spoke fluently. He was mapping out a counterattack so audacious, so complex, it made her lawyer's strategies look like playground squabbles. Olivia watched him, mesmerized. For the first time in nearly 2 years, he wasn't Ethan, the penitent exile. He was Ethan Hayes, the founder of Innovate-X, the man who could see the patterns no one else could. He wasn't looking at her with guilt or longing, but with the focused intensity of a partner solving a problem. "You could use Innovate-X's data analysis division," he said, his eyes gleaming. "We could build a predictive model of his financial network, find his weakest link, and exploit it. We could bury him in his own paperwork." She was silent for a long time, the tablet glowing between them. The air was charged with a new, unfamiliar energy. Her contract, her blueprint for their separate lives, had not accounted for this. It had not accounted for a scenario where she might need him. Not his money, but his mind. His particular brand of genius. To accept his help would be to blur the lines she had so carefully drawn. It would mean letting him back in, not as a husband, but as an ally. It was a dangerous proposition. But the alternative, losing everything she had fought so hard to build, was unthinkable. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this? It's not in the contract." Ethan finally looked up from the tablet, his eyes meeting hers. The strategic fire in them softened, replaced by a raw, aching sincerity. "Because he's trying to destroy something beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And because I know what it's like to tear down something beautiful. And I can't stand by and watch it happen again. Especially not to you." He paused, taking a breath. "And because he's trying to take away the future of my son's mother. This has everything to do with me." In his words, she didn't hear a plea for forgiveness or a strategy for reconciliation. She heard a truth so simple and profound, it shook the foundations of the wall she had built around her heart. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to save her. And in that moment, the architect and the innovator, the estranged wife and the exiled husband, were no longer on opposite sides of a contract. They were two people facing a common enemy, with the fate of an empire hanging in the balance. The decision to accept Ethan's help was not a surrender. It was a strategic pivot. Olivia laid out the new terms with the same precision she had used for their first contract. "This is a temporary alliance, Ethan, a joint venture with a single objective, neutralizing Alistair Finch," she stated, her voice firm. They were in her office at Blackwood Commons, a neutral territory. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, a scent of progress. "We do not discuss the past. We do not discuss our arrangement. We are business partners. Nothing more." "Understood," Ethan agreed, his expression serious. He knew this was a test. Any attempt to cross the lines she had drawn would shatter this fragile truce. And so began the war. It was fought not on construction sites, but in the digital ether. The guest wing of the glass house transformed into a covert operations center. Ethan, re-energized and focused, brought the full, formidable power of InnovateX to bear. He assembled a small, loyal team from his data analysis division. Tech wizards who could trace money through the darkest corners of the internet. They worked late into the night, long after Leo was asleep. The great room, once a symbol of their fractured life, became their war room. Blueprints for Blackwood Commons were pinned up alongside complex network diagrams mapping Finch's corporate empire. For the first time in 2 years, they shared a space without the suffocating weight of their personal history. They were united by a common goal, their minds locked in a dance of strategy and counter-strategy. Olivia had never seen Ethan like this, not even in the early days of InnovateX. He was relentless, brilliant, and utterly in his element. He would pace the room, firing off ideas, connecting disparate pieces of information with breathtaking speed. And she was his equal, her deep understanding of urban planning and real estate law providing the real-world context for his digital attacks. She would point to a weakness in Finch's property portfolio. He would devise a way to exploit it online. One night, hunched over a satellite map of Finch's holdings, their heads were bent close together. Her hair brushed against his cheek, and the faint scent of her shampoo, a clean, citrusy fragrance he remembered so well, filled his senses. He froze for a fraction of a second. She pulled back slightly, a flicker of awareness in her eyes. The air crackled with unspoken electricity. The business partners were, for a moment, just a man and a woman in a quiet house. "We should focus," she said, her voice a little too sharp as she pointedly tapped the screen. The moment passed, but the memory of it lingered. The wall between them, once solid concrete, now felt like porous stone. Their strategy was multi-pronged and devastating. Ethan's team launched a phantom shareholder movement, using a network of anonymous online forums to rally Finch's disgruntled minority investors, sowing dissent within his own company. Simultaneously, they uncovered a series of environmental violations at one of Finch's older, forgotten properties, violations he had paid to keep buried for years. They leaked the information not to a major news network, but to a small, fiercely independent environmental blog. The story caught fire, and Finch, who prided himself on his public image, was suddenly mired in a PR nightmare. Alistair Finch, the old lion, was bewildered. He was being attacked from a dozen different directions at once. His legal challenges to Blackwood Commons were mysteriously delayed in committee. His stock price dipped. His carefully curated reputation was being dismantled online by an army of invisible enemies. He knew he was at war, but he couldn't see his opponent. The turning point came when Ethan's team found the real skeleton in Finch's closet, a secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands, used to funnel money to a corrupt city official in exchange for favorable zoning decisions a decade prior. It was the kill shot. "We have him," Ethan said, his voice quiet with triumph. It was nearly 3 a.m. They were alone in the great room, the city lights twinkling below. Leo was asleep upstairs. Olivia looked at the evidence on the screen, a clear, undeniable trail of corruption. They could destroy Finch completely, ruin his life, end his career. A year ago, she might have relished the thought. But something had shifted. "What do we do with it?" she asked. "We could leak it," Ethan suggested. "The district attorney would have a field day. He'd go to prison." Olivia shook her head slowly. "No, that's his move. That's what he would do to us." She looked at Ethan, her gaze direct and searching. "We're not him." In that moment, Ethan felt a surge of admiration so powerful, it almost brought him to his knees. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and attacked, yet she had not allowed the darkness of the world to extinguish her own light. She was fighting to win, but she was determined to do it on her own terms. "So what do you suggest, partner?" he asked, the word feeling more real than it ever had before. "We use it as leverage," she said. "We don't destroy him, we neutralize him." The next day, Olivia met Alistair Finch for coffee. She walked in alone, calm and composed. She slid a single piece of paper across the table, a bank transfer record with an account number and a name. Finch looked at it, and the color drained from his face. "All your lawsuits will be dropped," Olivia said, her voice soft but firm. "All your challenges at City Hall will be withdrawn. You will sell me the 3 properties you own bordering Blackwood Commons at their original market value, and you will never interfere with my business, or any business connected to me, ever again. In return, this," she tapped the paper, "disappears forever." Finch, the titan of industry, looked like a broken man. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly defeated. He nodded slowly. Unable to meet her eyes, Olivia walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright sunlight, feeling a sense of victory that was deeper than she had expected. She hadn't just saved her project, she had won on her own terms, without sacrificing her principles. That evening, a celebratory mood filled the house. Ethan had ordered dinner from their favorite Italian restaurant, the one they used to go to for anniversaries. He even opened a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. "To a successful joint venture," he said, raising his glass. "To success," she agreed, touching her glass to his. The chink of the crystal sounded different this time, less like a formality, more like a connection. They ate in a comfortable silence, the tension that had defined their relationship for 2 years finally gone. After dinner, as she was getting ready to head up to her room, a new variable entered the equation. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale, the color draining from it just as it had from Alistair Finch's. "What is it?" Olivia asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. A ghost from the past had just reappeared. "It's a text message," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned the phone around so she could see the screen. It was from an unknown number. The message was only 3 words, but they were enough to detonate the fragile peace they had just built. It read, "I'm back, Ethan." And beneath the text was a recent photo of Chloe Sterling smiling, holding a baby with Ethan's eyes,